Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Humanities Center for. I can't control a room anymore. I've lost the teacher's art. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Humanities Center for this, the very final session. Oh.
I'm talking to Antonietta.
This is the very final session in our series on natural landscapes and human meaning. It's remarkable when one thinks about it, but it was in the fall semester of 2022 when this endeavour commenced, and we have devoted entire semesters to wide-ranging explorations of each of our 6 chosen landscapes: the ocean, the desert, the forests, the frozen realms, the mountain, and of course this semester the city. In this undertaking, the aim has consistently been to bring together in conversation scholars from across the whole range of the arts and sciences. As our good friend and colleague Michel Boudriat has put it, it's truly been an exercise in the scope and vision of the liberal arts ideal. I'm grateful to everyone who has participated in this series, many of whom are here in the audience and were really wonderful in their presentations. I'm grateful also to Lindy Veer and Magdalene McRae for their organizational prowess. And yes, indeed. And grateful also to everyone who's attended these events and supported our work here. Thank you. It's been lovely to have such full rooms every Tuesday. For those who will miss the landscape series, I'm happy to announce there'll be something in the nature of a sequel in the works for next semester. If you think about the trajectory of our series, we have moved from the wild places into the very human realm of cities. Ending up today with San Diego itself. So you're moving like closer towards what one might think of as home. And in the fall, we move still further into the familiar, as our subject matter will be, the idea of home. And we'll explore home from a range of disciplines and perspectives. More details to follow, so you stay on the edge of your seat for a while. But let's not think too far into the future and instead focus on today's session and our very special guests here. I'm going to introduce them in order of speaking today. María José Plascencia did her bachelor's degree at the University of Southern California, USC, and subsequently received her PhD in American Studies from Yale University. Yeah. She joined USD's faculty this academic year and is assistant professor in the Department of Ethnic Studies. Dr. Plascencia is an interdisciplinary scholar who explores placemaking, social movements, and cultural production at the US-Mexico border. She grew up, indeed, in the Tijuana-Chula Vista border region, and her background informs her community-engaged methods. In her research, Dr. Plascencia explores how people anchor themselves and their families through work, politics, and civic engagement in Tijuana, a city often thought about merely as a space of transit. All of us here in the college are delighted that Dr. Plascencia joined us this year, and it is great to have you speaking here at the Humanities Center for the first time. So thank you for joining us. Amanda Petersen received her PhD from the University of Colorado at Boulder, having previously been educated at Wichita State University. She joined the faculty of USD in 2008 and is professor in the Department of Languages, Cultures and Literatures and is affiliated with the Latin American Studies and Women's and Gender Studies programs. Dr. Petersen is also Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies. Her research interests center on the difficulty of representing issues of gender and violence, in particular in contemporary Mexican short narratives by women authors. Dr. Petersen is co-editor of the remarkable book titled Espectros, Ghostly Hauntings in Contemporary Trans-Hispanic Narratives, published in 2016 by Bucknell University Press. This book has been variously reviewed as readable, thought-provoking, and deeply moving, and as, I quote, no doubt a key text for years to come. So thank you also for being with us today. And our third speaker, and really closing the series down for us, is Noelle Norton, who is Professor of Political Science and has been Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD since 2013. Her first degree in political science and public administration was undertaken at UCLA, and her PhD was earned at UC Santa Barbara. She joined the faculty of USD in 1994 and is a specialist in American government, specifically in the workings of the US Congress and its relation to gender politics. Among her many publications are the volumes Gender, Power, Leadership and Governance, Women Transforming Congress, and Creating Gender, the Sexual Politics of Welfare Policy. Dr. Norton is currently working with an undergraduate research assistant on an analysis of congressional handling of international women's gender violence legislation. It's out.
No, I think it just tanked.
Oh, you don't want to say that.
Well,
Oh, not your article. You mean
the world.
Yes.
So it's irrelevant now.
But on occasions like this, one should never fail to stress that without the vision of Dr. Norton's leadership in the college and without her commitment to the liberal arts, this Humanities Center just would not exist. So thank you so very much. So, bringing our big series to its close and speaking on San Diego, our city, please welcome, first of all, Dr. María Plascencia.
Thank you all for having me here today, and a special shout out to my students for always showing up and representing. Thank you for being here. I'm honored to be a part of this series, and I've been thinking a lot about what the title of today's session means to me, our city, San Diego. To be honest, a lot about San Diego is pretty new to me, even though I grew up here. Geographer Tim Creswell states, quote, "Place is not just a thing in the world, but a way of understanding the world. Tijuana is my object of study and my way of seeing the world. I am a fronteriza, a border person who grew up in the Tijuana-Chula Vista region, south of the 8, west of the 805. This is very important. Rarely, if ever, did I travel north to downtown San Diego or north of that, or let's be honest, north of the In-N-Out at the Mile of Cars in National City. How many of you know where that is? Okay. The San Diego I grew up in is a border region of street vendors, trans-border commuters, and working-class folks of Latine and Filipine backgrounds. My city, my landscape, was a lemon tree in our backyard, a monument to the once farming community of Chula Vista, where my family still lives, 4 houses down from my tias and tios, aunts and uncles. San Diego as an aesthetic, a beach city, and America's finest city, can be really good at hiding all the realities that create the border region, including the militarization, environmental injustices, and violence. I get wildly different responses if I tell people that I am from San Diego versus telling them that I am from Tijuana. And yet I am from both. And it is this tension that inspired the research behind my current project. My current manuscript is titled Tijuana es Historia de Familias, or Tijuana is a History of Families, Working-Class Migrants, and the Making of the Border City. And it documents the stories of people like my own family and their role in shaping the Tijuana-San Diego border region across the 20th century. The stories I will tell you today come from my research specifically at a restaurant called La Vuelta, which is a restaurant that's been around since the 1930s and where I conducted dozens of oral history interviews and pláticas or informal conversations with workers, customers, and community members at large. Since the 1930s, when La Vuelta first opened, people from all walks of life have come together for casual meals, celebrations, first dates, collective mourning, and everything in between. In her book, A Place at the Nayarit, Natalia Molina coins the term urban anchors to describe semi-public places that are small and built by the community for the community. She argues that urban anchors have a sort of placemaking that goes in them that is social and cultural, sustained by the countless acts of everyday life that build and sustain effective relationships in a particular time and place. Acts like eating, laughing, gossiping, debating, celebrating, and forging community. La Vuelta is an example of how community members define places on their own terms. It exists as an alternative, as a challenge to the dominant ideas that exist about Tijuana as only a site of violence, poverty, and despair. It offers a place of community, love, and hope. It offers spiritual and physical protection. For many, La Vuelta was a place that helped them transition into Tijuana and led them to upward economic mobility after migrating to the border region. The restaurant was and continues to be an urban anchor that provides a sense of community and connects workers, customers, and others to a wider web of resources in the city. At La Vuelta, people have taught each other how to read and write, have helped each other apply for passports, have saved money for school materials for their children as a collective, and much more. It is my connection with the people at the restaurant that made this whole project possible. And that thing that looks like a cake on the table is me as a baby. And the people around me are some of the people I interviewed and are in it. Yes.
Yeah.
In 1957, Don Pablo and Doña Josefina and 5 of their children journeyed together from Jalisco to Tijuana. Their eldest child, Manuel, was only 12 years old and had already migrated to the region and was waiting for them. Jesus María, known as La Cuata or the twin, tells me about their journey. She says, "My dad brought us on a train until Mexicali, and from there we took a bus to Tijuana that cut through La Rumorosa." And in a second, I'll show you a picture of La Rumorosa. Once in Tijuana, they moved to the Brambila Ranch, and the Brambila family hired ex-bracero Don Pablo López to tend the land in the rancho in Tijuana. And they also hired my grandmother, Doña Josefina López, to help cook and clean the Brambila household. Their older children were about 20 years old living in LA, and their younger children grew up in Tijuana, and some were even born in Tijuana in the coming years. As Don Pablo and Doña Josefina sold crops to fellow neighbors, they made connections that lasted generations. I even got a chance to meet some of their friends when I was very young and living in the house that my grandfather built with his own hands in Tijuana. And the son of the Brambilas was actually my doctor when I was growing up. For the Lopez children, memories of their early years in Tijuana brings nostalgia. My mom, La Cuata, remembers not having electricity or paved floors at the rancho, but, quote, they were happy. As my mom told me about the community-organized school carpool system they had at the rancho, she expressed nostalgia for a different Tijuana, a city where everyone knew everyone and where she felt safe. If you talk to her and her siblings, they'll tell you stories about Tijuana before there was a lot of traffic, a lot of people, and buildings. They reminisce, for example, about walking 1 hour from the rancho to the downtown area, or what she calls the city of Tijuana, to go to church, the mercado, and the movies. She says, and her interview was in Spanish, but for the sake of this, I'll translate it in English. She says, quote, "We were the ones that lived outside of the city. We walked about 1 hour and took a bus for 6 cents to go to the Catedral," pictured on the left there. "Every Sunday we went downtown. My dad took us and some cousins. We would get to the church on a bus, and he would take us to the market that still exists, the Mercado Municipal, and there we ate beef stew and rice. And later he would take us to the movies. They allowed us in as children at the Reforma movie theater. When we got out of there, he would always buy us a tortas from Tortas El Turco, some of the first tortas in Tijuana. And from there we took the bus. But then my dad met a taxi driver, and he would put us all in his car, one on top of the other, and he would take us all the way back to the rancho for free. That man was a good person, and those were our outings every Sunday." For La Cuata and her family, there was a clear distinction between the rancho or the rural and Tijuana, the urban. She considered El Centro the city, whereas where she lived for her was a rural area. Although the city has changed dramatically since the years of their Sunday pilgrimages to the downtown area, La Cuata can still visit some of the urban anchors she referred to in her oral history, like the market, the catedral, and Tortas el Turco. A few years later, her brother Tony Lopez was trying to revitalize a historic restaurant in downtown Tijuana, and he wanted her help. And so on March 19th, 1976, La Vuelta was reopened by my uncle Tony Salvador and my mom, Jesus Maria Lopez La Cuata. As an urban anchor, La Vuelta became an important site of community, not just for my family, but for migrants from all over Mexico and most recently, all other parts of the world. In my longer manuscript, I tell you a lot about these stories, but for today, I'm just going to tell you about Mario. In 1969, 24-year-old Mario Andrade worked as a cargador or a day laborer in the fields of his home state of Michoacán. After 6th grade, he dropped out of school to work in the fields where he picked tomatoes, onions, and other crops. He traveled around Mexico working from field to field until he decided that he wanted to migrate to the United States. It was then that he took the tren carguero, or the cargo train, from Michoacán to Mexicali, Baja California. Mario hitchhiked his way through the federal road that tethers Baja California to the rest of Mexico through the Rumorosa. Has anyone driven through the Rumorosa before? It's a little scary, right? When Mario journeyed to the border in his young 20s, his goal was not necessarily to end up in Tijuana. He actually made it to the United States, but when he was in Yuma, he was caught by the Border Patrol and deported. Without much resources to use to go back to Michoacán, he decided to try to make his way to Tijuana. Unlike the Lopez families, who had connections from the pueblo in Tijuana already when they arrived, Mario was alone. During our interview, I asked Mario where he lived when he first arrived in the city, and he laughed. He said, quote, "When I first arrived in Tijuana, I stayed on that hill, and from there I would walk down to wash cars. When your uncle brought me over here to work at La Vuelta, well, those kinds of situations changed," end quote. As he told me this, Mario pointed to the hill just across the street from the restaurant. Mario met Tony Lopez, my uncle, at the Ranita Sabia car wash, or the Wise Frog car wash, which is just a few stores down from the restaurant, and it's still there. And Tony hired him to drive the valet parking at the restaurant. Mario did not know how to drive, so Tony had to teach him. And Mario reflects on this in the interview. He says, quote, "To be able to move the cars there, I just put them in neutral and I pushed them. I struggled to be able to work at the restaurant," end quote. And one of my favorite stories that he told me is, he says, "One day I encountered a car unlike anything I'd ever seen. He ran into the restaurant and told everyone, 'Hay un carro que quiere volar. There's a car that wants to fly.' Can anyone guess what he was trying to drive? What cars kind of fly? Lowriders, exactly. So in true Borderlands fashion, it turned out to be a lowrider. As a worker at La Vuelta, Mario experienced things that he was unlikely to experience in his rural community of Michoacán, like a lowrider car, and potentially even learning how to drive. Soon enough, he was working inside the restaurant as a server. Mario retired in the early 2000s, but after the passing of his wife, he asked La Cuata if he could return to work. In the final moments of our oral history interview, Mario reflected on his journey to Tijuana, and he told me, quote, "Here in this job, I got married, I built my house, I raised a family, I retired, and we are still here, María José. We are here fighting for our life like everyone else. Y aquí estamos." A theme across my interviews, across all of them, is how much the city has changed. When I asked Mario about what changed in Tijuana since his arrival, he says, quote, "The traffic." When I asked my mom, she told me this quote that is one of my favorite quotes in all of my oral history interviews. She says, quote, "In the ranch where I grew up, I remember that all the cousins would gather at night. It was all the ranchos surrounding us, and we would count the cars driving in the Boulevard Díaz Ordaz en la Mesa. The light that you could see was from the Hipódromo only. Everything was dark, except for the little light of the very few cars that kept driving. There were so few residents that we all knew each other. Today, on a clear night, you can see the thousands of lights of residences and businesses that populate the hills of Tijuana from her house in Chula Vista. Gone are the days of rural communities and a small enough population where everyone knew each other. Today, the city continues to sprawl, and a community archivist that I work with named Don José is amazed by this. He says, "Tijuana grows even though there is no water. That is what is most incredible. That is what surprises me. Today, the San Isidro-Tijuana border region is one of the busiest ports of entry, and after Operation Gatekeeper in 1994 and post 9/11 border militarization and policing, the U.S.-Mexico border at large is the most dangerous land border crossing in the world. In the words of one of our community members in Tijuana, Don Robert, he says, "Desde las torres, eso cambió todo," or ever since the Twin Towers, that's when everything changed. Still, La Vuelta remains an urban anchor today, providing a safety net and community for longtime residents and recent arrivals. As Tijuana continues to change, La Vuelta is a microcosm of an older, smaller city. It is a place that the working class continues to define on their own terms, even if other aspects of their city sprawls beyond their reach. The process of uncovering these histories was also a process of uncovering parts of myself, my family, and my ancestors. Tijuana es Historia de Familia, as a title to my manuscript, directly comes from Don José Saldaña, a community archivist, who told me this as he sipped his coffee from a brown mug I recognize as home. It translates loosely to Tijuana is a history of families. We were sitting at my favorite table at the restaurant known as Calle Cuata. Its nickname comes from the tiny blue street sign on the mural that says Calle de la Cuata, or the Street of the Twin. The table is named after my mother. And as a child, I sat at this table blowing out the candles to my birthday cake. As a teenager, I sat there and learned all the words to the songs that the mariachi played. As an adult, I sit there now and I collect the stories of people who make up Tijuana's heartbeat. My family and the workers at La Vuelta, who are also my family, raised me with stories. Growing up, they told me about the dancers performing at the Agua Caliente during the Prohibition era, the braceros who built their own homes in the 1950s and 1960s, and the train journeys they took to migrate to the border region. Don José, Mario, La Cuata, and my Tijuana community taught me to listen carefully and let these stories lead me through the archive. They all made my current project possible. In maintaining these stories and connections throughout their lifetimes, Don José, La Cuata, Mario, and other community members of La Vuelta are keepers of the city of Tijuana. And so I leave you with a few questions. When you hear San Diego, our city, do you render any histories, realities, and/or communities invisible? Who and what is included in your vision of San Diego? Is there room to listen for and share other stories? Thank you.
I'll start out by thanking everyone so much for not only this labor of love of activity and discussion and today, but the years of discourse. And it has really been, this series has been kind of at the highlight of my weeks on a regular basis for years now. And I will miss it, and I look forward to the next series. And thank you as well to Maggie and Lindy and Brian for all of the planning that you're doing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, in ways that are similar to MJ, I'm a literary studies scholar and a cultural studies scholar, and you'll see my approaches in that. And I am especially specifically in Mexico, in border studies and gender studies, and so you'll see that as we go. My positionality, I am a professor of Spanish, of Latin American studies. I am indeed from Kansas, as Brian already outed me in my previous studies. And I have spent kind of the majority of my life in lands that should have or belong to Mexico and before the U.S. invasion of Mexico. And so when I moved to San Diego a long time ago, and I'll tell you years soon, I always just... The America's Finest City, and people have written tomes and tomes and tomes about this, has really pissed me off. Like, forever, I hate it. It's my least favorite thing. And one of the things that I really wanted to kind of discover about this, why I have such an allergy to this expression, is exactly what MJ was talking about, is that of the erasure that the story of San Diego as America's Finest City creates on all sorts of stories throughout. So as I'll walk you through kind of how I think about spaces and cities. And one of my first questions when I'm like, America's Finest City, I'm like, well, which America? You know, which the Americas? Latin America? Is San Diego Latin America? And I also, you know, I like to play and snark and eye rolls. And whenever my mom is in San Diego and she comes and says, San Diego is just the best place in the world. You're just so lucky. And I'm always like, yeah. All this said, my love for San Diego is kind of curious. And I love the parts of the areas that break the finest city narrative and the things that we find in the margins and the interstices that give us different stories and often kind of ghostly stories. I'm not really going to talk that much about ghosts today, but I will a little bit. And so when I think about America's Finest City, I wonder, is it maybe the most haunted? Is it the most pretend authentic, the most fakeish? I don't know. I do have lots of things about that, but I'm always fascinated by the construct that San Diego, and let's face it, California, Southern California in particular, is obsessed with making with what is real, what is authentic, and who we think we are or should be. So in this, I'm thinking a lot in the lines of the notions of Michel Desserteau and Walking in the City, and this is a great quote, but so there's no city that is not haunted by different spirits hidden in there. Spirits can invoke or not. The haunted places are the only ones that people can live in, and this inverts the schema of the panopticon. And so what I really kind of want to talk about here is those silences that are evoked in San Diego. And I agree with MJ. San Diego is so good at erasing, like really, really good, appallingly so. And I won't talk about like the biggest historical versions of that, but I want to give a few examples. So I said I was from Kansas. I grew up in Texas. And so my particular version, before I lived in Mexico, of what Mexico food was very specific and involved a lot of cumin. If you are a Mexicanist or you study food pathways, you know that cumin is not the most common spice in the majority of Mexico. Mexico City, Antonieta's looking at me like, no, guacala. And so when I learned to make guacamole, it was when I was 5 or 6 or 7. I was young, but pretend, in San Antonio. And our neighbor, her name was Kathy Hernandez, she taught my mom how to make guacamole. And she also taught my mom how to make carne guisada because she saw my mom with 2 young kids and she was like, this lady needs help. Kathy was on disability, but so she was home and she was bored and she loved it when we came over, and she taught me to make guacamole, and she made it with comino, with cumin. For those of us who know the food histories and pathways, one of the reasons why Tex-Mex versus other foods have cumin is because the people who conquered that land was from the south, and they from Andalusia, and they have documented the foodways of cumin coming to those areas and existing along the northern borders, but much less in central Mexico and not that much over here. So when I was probably brand new professor at a conference in El Paso. And I'm really excited because I'm going to get my Texas tacos that I had been searching for in San Diego. That I was game for any kind of taco except for the San Diegan taco. It wasn't my jam, and I just kind of was like, "What's happening here? I can't find the thing that feels quote unquote authentic to me." So I talked to a grad student. I said, "Hey," and she had just moved to El Paso from San Diego, and I said, "Hey, I need to talk to you. Let's talk tacos." And she was like, "Oh, happy to talk to you. And so we chatted, and I said, how do you feel about the tacos here? And she's like, "I hate them. They're so heavy. These are not tacos for me." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And she's like, "What do you think about the tacos in San Diego?" And I was like, "They don't feel like home to me. Like what? It's neither Mexico City or Puebla or Central Mexico. It's San Diego." And so, we all know the fried fish taco that is classic for San Diego. And in Texas, the flour tortilla is almost like naan. It's almost that thick, and it's really pillowy, and often has comino, which some people don't like, or don't read as authentic. So when I'm talking about kind of America's Finest City and talking about kind of this discourse, one of the reasons why I probably like it is the strong and easy. It's really easy to criticize, like America's Finest City, like bring it. So when I was new faculty and I first moved here, I moved here in 2008, as Brian said. It was 2 years into Mexico's war on drugs. 2006, Presidente Calderón declares a war on drugs in Mexico, very much influenced by the U.S., very much forced by the U.S. to do that. It is a time in 2008 of lots of violence in Tijuana. When I first arrived, there were lots of students that were talking about, we go to Tijuana over the weekend to hang out and celebrate. A year or two after that, no one is going to Tijuana. And in the local news, it was, they would give the counts of how many headless bodies they found in the streets during this time. So it took me a little, just a little tiny bit, just, a few months to kind of cross myself. And it was for a centennial celebration in Mexico. About the revolution, lots of things, really cool story that we're not going to talk about right now. And when I cross back, the border agent with a deadpan delivery looks at me. They always ask, like, what were you doing in Mexico today? And I was with a friend, and we were like, oh, we went to a museum. And deadpan, not even being sarcastic or jerky, Mexico has museums. There are museums in Mexico. And if you know anything about Mexico, Mexico is obsessed with museums. Like, its museum culture is, like, over the top insane. So we could talk about that in Tijuana. We could do all that analysis. But Mexico is, like, crazy on its monuments and museums. Like, this is, like, it's insane. It's amazing. It's one of my favorite things. But, like, that a border agent would be, like, so deadpan, and his surprise, granted, if we were in the middle of, the so-called war on drugs from Calderón. But I always remember that when I'm crossing, that first moment that I was coming back from the Secut, which is a Centro Cultural de Tijuana. And one of the things that Tijuana has become is a place of collaboration, a place of creation, a place of dialogue that doesn't always exist in what we think of historically as a border town, or even in part of what the discourse is of America's finest city. So another thing that has always given me just major allergies about San Diego is Old Town. I have this love-hate relationship with it now. I really used to disparage it, and it's probably because when I hadn't lived here for very long. I just overheard a conversation, and she was like, "Oh my God, have you been to Old Town? You have to go. It's just like Mexico." And I was like, what, huh? What's this? And so I have since had a lot of curiosity about Old Town and the secrets that it kind of holds. And one of the things that I really think about a lot is about how it teaches us to consume Mexico. A lot of its discourse is around consuming Mexico. And of course, we all love Taco Tuesday. We like all of our places over there and our margaritas. And then, the lady who at the Canyon Grill or Coyote Grill, who's like making tortillas fresh in front, displaying her kind of authenticity in making these. But one of the things that I'm always fascinated at, and if you pay attention, it's here. This picture, I confess, it's from LA, not from San Diego. But there are posters of, "I want you, gringo, to join the Mexican Revolution." And then there's a funny one, too, that it's like Homeland Security fighting terrorism since 1878, because there's a lot of fascinating connections between the border policing / U.S. robbery of nation and the policing of kind of the frontier. And this is where we kind of move to this idea of consuming the criminal and a little bit of frontier ideology. Hats off to a nod to Michael Gonzalez, who gave us a very fun, disturbing discussion about frontier discourse. So those posters that are talking about the Mexican Revolution and the 1910s, those are really iconic in part because what we have in this region and in LA and San Diego is we have a huge wave of Mexican, and I'll talk about how the border crossed this area in a second, but we have a huge wave of pretty well-to-do Mexicans who come in and settle in this time. And so like we have lots of historic examples of that in San Diego, of these areas that have been repeatedly historically displaced, but we're not going to talk about that right now. But the discourse of kind of frontier and bandit and all of those things are marking this historical moment that's really important in one of the first large waves of Mexican citizens that come to the U.S. So when this quote that I really enjoy, that I hadn't remembered it when I went back to the book, and he talks about how MLK criticized the frontier ideal, saying that it fed into reinforcing pathologies, into racism, into violent masculinity, and moralism that celebrates the rich and punishes the poor. And when I go to San Diego, when I go to Old Town, I think about that a lot. And one of the things that I bear with me for a second on this. A lot of people will kind of know some of the story. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I'm going to tell this little piece. So this was last week, around, I don't know, I think it was 2020, 2021. I had a student who, it was pandemic times, and like the rest of us were not going to anywhere public, but he was like, I went to this bar and like I got this picture. He's like, there's a head in a jar. And I was like, okay. And I knew what it was, and I knew that there were replicas of it. So for those, I will tell you first the story that the guy at the Cosmopolitan Hotel told me, and this was last week, so you're welcome for fresh off, my mental space. So he tells me, he says, do you know the story? And I was like, oh yeah, I do, but tell me. I don't know if I know that much, which, he comes and he says, there's this head in a jar. And it was during this time, there was a lot of bandits during the gold rush, and there were all these criminals, and they were robbing from the rich. And I was like, and giving to the poor. And he's like, no, not really. He's not really a Robin Hood, And I was like, okay. And I was like, so like, is there actually a head in a jar? And he's like, yeah. And I got to tell you, you got to prepare yourself because it looks just like the real thing. And I was like, oh yeah, just like Mexico. Mm-hmm. And so I go, this is my picture of the unveiling. Just, there's a very silly, he actually directed the whole video. He was like, take a video, you need to lift your left hand, put your back here, so that I could have the entire kind of theatrical scene of what this is. But the story of Joaquin Murrieta is much, much, much more complex, and we could talk about this for forever, and we're not going to. But one of the things that is absent in this guy's discourse is that Joaquin Murrieta is historically happening in kind of 1847, 1848. He's captured in 1853. 1847 to 1848 is the U.S. invasion of Mexico. 1848 is the Tratado de Guadalupe. When the things are signed, there are parts of it that seem fairly just that are not followed at all. There are parts that are gross injustices. So this is literally the legacy of the border crossed us, right? And so it's fascinating to me that in this discourse, he's like, oh yeah, they got the bad guy. And this part is true. They cured the head in whiskey, the documents say, and they traveled the head around all of California in a jar as a lesson, right? We're both consuming the criminality, but we're saying, hey, no bandits, no Robin Hood bandits. This is not okay. So we're going to travel with the head. And there are newspaper documents, and people have done all sorts of amazing research on this kind of thing. But as a strange historical coincidence, by the way, the actual original head was destroyed in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake of April 15th. And I make that connection because I get, updates in my phone about historical moments in California. And I was like, no way, how is that possible? So chop it up for coincidence. But my point in this discourse of Old Town and its what's authentic and what's real and its performance of Mexico is that Mexico is entirely erased in that narrative that my friend now at the Cosmopolitan Museum, Cosmopolitan Hotel shows. And he talks about this frontier discourse of we got them and then we shared. And it is very much a seductive discourse of kind of consuming criminality. So thinking about de Certeau again, he talks about kind of how the city serves as a totalitizing and mythical landmark. And I think one of the things that probably most bugs me about Old Town is that it's so in on that narrative of America's finest city that I'm always like, really? Wow. So it is a fascinating historical walking the city type of moment. But as I'm moving on to kind of my next little point, and I just have two short more, I wanted to talk about this kind of reemergence, and sorry for my paper noises, the reemergence and what kind of falls in between the cracks when we're talking about this consumption of Mexico or the image of Mexico, or this pretending that it's just like Mexico. And so I really like this idea that Certeau talks about the reemergence of elements of the urbanistic project that were excluded. Have some examples of that. This is down in City Heights, basically, and of kind of what reemerges and enters in between the cracks. So the last example that I have is kind of this idea of San Diego as America's finest city, and about how it really talks about solidarity for some and not for all. And I'm not even talking, I can't wrap my head around talking about today in this moment, but I'm thinking about all these things in the past vis-a-vis what's happening today. So this image is actually one of my neighbors, and right on the corner of their house, there is still a mural that is painted in solidarity with Ukrainian political refugees from 2022. As a side note, in 2020, they also had a George Floyd mural. Okay, still there. I checked this morning just to make sure, because those are things that you don't see. And when I was reflecting on this and how there was so much mobilization and support for Ukrainian refugees coming in, and if we were to think about those of us who study migration, we know that there are waves of Haitians, there has been waves of Venezuelans, there's been Central Americans, and none of that mobilization has happened in the past. And I was creating this. So I was creating this kind of image of flow and movement and how all of the connectivity of what we are and who we are as border and town. And I was really reflecting on, yes, these are kind of motions that people take and could take, but not all are allowed that. And then the month that I finished this was a month that there were 2 people who drowned trying to swim across the ocean to Crowman. And then here's just a little bit of detail on that image and kind of an idea of what I think about in terms of haunted geography and border resonances, and thinking about kind of erasures and how we talk about that. So as I wrap up, and this is my time, there's a couple different pieces that I kind of want to talk about, but how this frontier discourse takes away the idea of social solidarity, and how social solidarity is something that we can all have, including in our food. And then this is, the border crossing and the end. So, yes, and I will pass over to Noelle.
Can you hear me? I can get off track, so I'm going to stick to my notes pretty closely. Deep into the first few months of the COVID-19 pandemic, a group of faculty started to meet weekly in a Zoom room to listen to Brian Clack outline his vision of a 3-year series, and we thought, 3-year series, okay, that he later titled Natural Landscapes and Human Meaning. These conversations started in that Zoom room with a philosopher, an art historian, an oceanographer, and a political scientist, and I was a political scientist, and they started in late 2020. I felt really lucky to be sitting in my yard with a computer on my lap, listening to plans to explore the intersection of literature, philosophy, art, science, when thinking about what seemed so complex to do at the time, the ocean, desert, forest, ice, and mountain, and city. Brian would talk about the series. Derek would flip through different slides on the PowerPoint, share your screen, and Ron and I would sit there and go, sounds great. Let's do it. So the result has been this magnificent set of discussions, art exhibits, pop-up courses, book groups, and that not only brought us all together here, but welcomed special national and international guests over the course of 3 years. The result has also demonstrated something Brian said earlier, but it's demonstrated how committed our Humanities Center is to interdisciplinary thinking spanning the arts and the sciences. The Landscape and Human Meaning series embodies our educational values and our commitment to complex thinking and enables us to understand the world simultaneously and to simultaneously transcend it by nurturing the intellectual and the creative. And so here we all are practicing this today. It has been a delight to be here every Tuesday, to drop into a book group, to just wander in and see an exhibit during a busy day. I thank all of you who have contributed to the series and to our collective joy of living. So when I mean contributed, being here is part of the contribution as well. We may have thought that 3 years was a long time, but it's gone pretty fast, hasn't it? So Brian asked me to do 2 things today. One is to wrap up the series, and the second is to address my city, San Diego. It was an honor to accept this invitation, but this actually wasn't an easy prompt necessarily, especially if one believes in a through line for a lecture or a set of transitions that are smooth. In the end, preparing this discussion and transition from landscape conclusions to my city, it stretched me in some directions that ranged from the theoretical to the artistic and into the political. So after I was driven to review the expanses of landscapes in the natural world and to think about their contrast to cities and then consider my relationship to these various terrains before jumping into my city. So after struggling with how to get from A to Z, I came out of this quagmire, and I'll share it with you now. I'm going to start by summarizing for you the first 5 parts of these series. I think it's important to take a moment and remember where we have been, from the oceans to the mountain. Second, I'm going to illustrate my lifelong eagerness to immerse myself in these landscapes far away from the city. But then I'm going to contrast this eagerness for the natural world with the magnetic lure of the city, which eventually placed me right here in San Diego. This process has enlightened me more than I had imagined completely. I now understand exactly how I got to San Diego, both physically and intellectually. I also feel less conflicted about my unabiding commitment to delight and savor and protect the environment, and all the same time, reveling in the opportunities and challenges that are presented by city life. So I have no doubt that those participating in any aspect of this series feels similarly, that you've been able to dig in and see if you have an affinity in one way or another with the landscape, and then to think about how that might connect to the city and how you might enjoy both the natural and the human-made landscapes. So let's start with the first part, the summary reminder of where we have been. So we're going to go over 5 parts of the 6-part series. I'm going to start by jumping into the ocean, which started in fall of 2022. And that's my pun, so you're supposed to kind of chuckle. Stop it, Ron. Anyway, this slide, do you remember where you last saw it? This was the billboard that greeted us on Linda Vista when the series commenced, with a set of scholarly and artistic reflections upon the power of the ocean and other bodies of water. So remember all the billboards that would be put up? They were just great to see those, that we were doing something unique, and they were always the most beautiful. So throughout the fall, we considered the allure or interest in the ocean from scientific, artistic, literary traditions, and that gave us the composite picture of the extraordinary nature of Earth's vast seas. We then thought about the lure and the lore of the ocean. And we did it through discovery and looking at those who explored and went on sea ventures, and those who were lured to, go there, and those who wanted to tell the stories about being there. We talked about Joseph Conrad, Herman Melville, and many more. But we didn't stop with arts, literature, and science. We listened to issues of controversies surrounding international law of the sea. We looked at indigenous marine sanctuaries and climate change. We were also treated to a guest lecture by von Schreibner. He had that book called Mer People, A Human History, where we learned about humanity's fascination with mermaids and mermen. Then, the desert. In spring of 2023, it feels like it's quite a while ago, the Humanities Center flyer noted that we were going to turn to what John Van Dyke called the Great Silence, the grim desolation of the desert. Beth O'Shea and Brian Clack helped us to imagine that grim desolation with their series launch on the sublime nature of Death Valley's desert geological formations. This was the semester we had the pleasure of engaging with Emma Stibbins' phenomenal work on Death Valley in our gallery, and we were also lucky enough to meet with Emma on Zoom from her studio in London. So combining arts and sciences again, we went on to learn about the flora and the fauna of Anza Borrego. We learned about ocean deserts. We learned about deserts and spirituality and desert border crossings. One of my favorite memories, I'm not quite sure how many of you were here, but it was when Ken Lane came to talk. He has an odd cult-like radio station in the desert, and it's called Desert Oracle. And so he came and regaled us with his new book, titled the same as his radio show, Desert Oracle, and he told us about UFO sightings, ghost towns, and what it was like to survive if you were stuck in the desert, in the Mojave or the Sonoran deserts. So, I'm going to go a little bit faster now, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the richness and the depth of each semester. But I'll touch on a couple things with each of these landscapes. My memories of the forest series are many. They include Mike Mayer, who I see here today from biology, who I keep thinking about your talk because you explained the elevational gradients of forests. I really now know where each type of tree goes. So thank you very much. Lisa Smith from English, she recounted the fear Little Red Riding Hood had in that immense dark wood. I see the story a bit differently now. Michel Boudria from Environmental and Ocean Sciences, he detailed the devastation of deforestation. The gallery exhibit of Gregory Crewdson's provocative photography really drew a lot of oohs and ahs from people who walked in there and were surprised and awed with the kind of work that was being shown. We also had stories and myths. We had Emily Bollender talk to us about the tree god, the Norse tree god, and Brian talked to us about English fairies. So it's really good that everybody I decided to reference today, when I wrote this the other day, you're all here. So thank you very much for that. But this is the semester that the Humanities Center book group read Thoreau's On Walden Pond. And Thoreau reminded us of the majesty of forests, like you see here. And he says, the forest is not merely an expression or representation of sacredness, nor a place to invoke the sacred. The forest is sacredness itself. And this is the way I felt about this series, that I was learning what everybody thought and felt in poetic and scientific ways. And that's just what we should be doing here in this space. Frozen Realms. Now, this is a picture. Tell me if I'm correct, Ryan. It is taken by one of our students. He was an undergraduate student, but now I think he's a graduate student in the Marine and Ocean Sciences program. So this was spring of 24. And this is when I learned how many of our faculty love Antarctica and the ice. It's just a little shocking. I guess you lured each other here. So I'm specifically thinking about Sue and Ron and Michelle. Just shocking. We looked at the wintry worlds that they adore, the ice fields, the ice plateaus, the glaciers, the polar landscapes. But Fred Robinson, who is an emeritus faculty from English, introduced us to Gretel Ehrlich's book, This Cold Heaven. And if you read that whole book, you feel cold when you're done. This cold having 7 seasons in Greenland. And he detailed her sense of what it's like to be in the cold, saying, "The cold is a thing that can break you, a hard and indifferent thing that wraps itself around you like a vice. In the presence of ice, everything is still, but there's nothing easy about that stillness." Then we went to the mountains. This was our last natural landscape. Fall of 24, you may remember this one the best. And we had faculty and staff talking about the allure of the mountain with stories of hiking, rappelling, and skiing from the Renaissance to today. I'm thinking of Brittany with the Renaissance hiking. I'm thinking of, going back to those guys going up just for the heck of it. The first people who were climbing mountains just for the heck of it. So we also spent a lot of time thinking about mountains being a place of stillness. And those of us in the Humanities Center book group that semester read Robert McFarlane's book, Mountains of the Mind, A History of a Fascination. And his sense is that, and here's his quote, "The mountains are the last places in the world where nature remains unsullied, where time has not been measured, where the earth still echoes with silence." So, we concluded these 5 parts in 2.5 years with this tapestry diagramming nature in its purest form, minimally altered by human hands. Here we considered places that are vast, unpredictable, and governed by the rhythms of the natural world. Spaces, although awe-inspiring and chaotic, they are often seen as a source of solace and a source of escape. So, in the second part of my talk, I'm going to outline my history of a fascination with these natural landscapes. Like most of us in the room, I have immersed myself in natural landscapes through the graceful and expert management of the National Park Service, marine sanctuaries, and national forest administrators. I have learned through my reflection, however, that this history of natural landscape fascination is what led me to this city. So, here we go. We're going to start with my fascination with the ocean. I have always lived by the sea in some way or another. The furthest point in my life, I think, was I live 15 miles away. This is my daughter and me. She's age 10 there, and we spent countless hours together in or on the ocean. Some of you who know me well know that I camped with my women friends and our children every summer for 20 years, and the nights were spent listening to the waves, and the days were spent making sandcastles right at the wave break. If I ever close my eyes and I'm asked, if you want to meditate, where do you go? Well, I go to, my spot of sheer happiness is in the ocean, and it's with my back to the ocean, facing forward and looking at the shore. Usually, I don't usually bring her with me into the meditation. She's out. It's just me. It's just me standing there. And I get particularly pensive when I'm in this kind of spot, and I think about Adrienne Rich's poem, Diving into the Wreck. While standing in the water, Rich describes the sea as untamed and vast, while still a place for transformation. The sea is not a question of power. I have to learn alone to turn my body without force in the deep element. There I am in the desert. I didn't see a real desert until I was about 20, but I find the size and the silence and the expanses of land and the cacti to be fascinating. Here I am hiking on the Delicate Arch Trail in Arches National Park. And this is where I bought my first copy of Edward Abbey's book, Desert Solitaire, in the Arches gift shop there. I hold on to that copy tightly. The Humanities Center book group read this book as part of our series. And in this book, Abbey says about the desert, the wind will not stop. It talks, it sings, it cries, it screams, it has 1,000 voices, and they all say one thing, that the desert is beautiful, mysterious, and alive. I agree with this completely and think his words are remarkable. I'm going to go a little bit faster. There's me. I am not so happy. I'm really not. And I am hiking in the Shasta Trinity National Forest that spans 2.2 million miles in Northern California. I began backpacking in the Los Padres National Forest when I was about 18. And I can't say I do this anymore, especially, I was about 30 here. But I can't do this anymore with 30 pounds on my back. But I still go hiking in these forests, so I just couldn't get to this spot. This is actually one of my favorite pictures. This is me in a frozen realm, trying to pretend that I'm Ron. And it captures everything that we discussed in the series about ice, the stillness, except for what you're hearing when you're in this picture, those of you who've been near the ice, is the sounds of the glaciers calving. And it's just an amazing sound. This was taken at Alik Bay, and it's part of the Kenai Fjord National Park. This is a mountain from the same trip, and this is in Denali National Park. And this is my daughter with me again, but now I call her my little fire fed. I can tell you about that at the party later. But there she is. Now, I'm going to the third part and conclusion to this talk, and I explain how I found the city. When we started the sixth and last part of the series, Brian noted that we were taking a jarring break, those were the words he used, between what we had explored and what we had just finished. He also stated that we needed to correct the occasionally one-sided diet of the back-to-nature enthusiast. Those who tend to see cities as something to escape, as noisy, dirty, poverty-stricken spaces, or as Edward Abbey says, frenetic worlds of commerce, traffic, and rubbish. So indeed, the city is chaotic, noisy, gritty as an environment where time and space are always moving, alive with energy and fraught with tension. It's a place where the natural world that we went through more placidly, it doesn't seem to exist, or at least it feels distant. I have assumed that I was born to be a nature enthusiast. Oh, sorry, that should have been up when I was talking about the city. So, I assumed I was born to be a nature enthusiast because I grew up in the bucolic California town, San Luis Obispo. This was my city. And it had small stores, a university, nestled in the hills in older rural California. We could have a conversation about decolonization, and settler colonization, but that would be another talk. Right now, I'm talking about where I came from. So little tiny pharmacies downtown. This is my dad, my grandfather, my mother, and they had the only veterinary pharmacy in the town. So it's just a small hometown. This is now a Victoria's Secret, by the way. And that's no joke. Anyway, that's my dad's side of the family. This is my mom's side of the family came because my grandfather was an expert in agriculture, and he ended up going and working at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I spent most of my time at Morro Rock, which is soon to be a Chumash Marine Sanctuary. My mother's house, and it's just a regular house, I think is this one right here. So, and by the way, I was on another mountain over here, hiking, taking that picture. This is, my dad bought a piece of land out in East San Luis Obispo County. It's 119 acres of nothing. There's no water. There's the fencing is all fallen down. He used the GI Bill to purchase it. He just wanted to have a piece of land. There's people in that picture. Well, that's probably that's my family. So anyway, it's just this piece of land that exists. It can never be developed. All the water has been sucked out of the water table and has gone to the wineries up in Paso Robles. And this is just a picture of a view. So this is the space that I grew up in. I was going to show you, I don't think I'm going to take the time to show you this movie. You can look it up on your own. It takes 3 minutes, but it's way too long for today. There's no change between San Luis Obispo 1949 and San Luis Obispo today. So here we are. In the introduction to the city semester, Brian read, there we go. Brian read, "Give Me the Splendid Silent Sun" by Walt Whitman. And you can just read it here as we move along. I'm going to talk a little bit. So he read us the stunning and beautiful contrast made by Walt Whitman, recommending both the rural and the urban life. He showed us these two stanzas, which neither of them are complete, from a Whitman poem, Give Me the Splendid Silent Sun, a poem that Whitman published in 1865, and then he put in 1867, he put it into his collection of poetry that was Leaves of Grass. It's the second part of the poem that leaves me speechless. The moment I saw the slide, it then left me thoughtful for weeks. Although a rural life filled with natural landscapes was my default, I have never fully reconciled the draw of the city and the joy I feel with the raw energy, crowded streets, vibrancy, and ceaseless motion that you feel in the city. And so the second stanza really resonates with me. And so I don't know how you read it, but this is how I read it. Keep your splendid silent suns. Keep, oh, your woods, oh, nature, the quiet places by the woods. Keep your fields of clover and timothy and your cornfields and orchards. Keep those blossoming buckwheat fields where the ninth-month bees hum. Give me faces and streets. Give me these phantoms, incessant and endless, among the trottoirs. Give me interminable eyes. Give me women. Give me comrades and lovers by the thousand. Let me see new ones every day. Let me hold new ones by the hand every day. Give me such shows. Give me the streets of Manhattan. So I just love that. And I thought about it. Well, Noelle has 2 pages 7s. Thank you. I began to think back to where my draw, because of all of that, where did my draw to the city come from? Why did this stanza make me so excited, given my interest in the quiet life, the landscape life? And so I'm going to show you this. These are Zillow photos. They're current Zillow photos of my grandfather's birthplace. This was his house, and where I lived when I went to UCLA. So this one has been gentrified, by the way. It wasn't quite like this when I used to go there all the time. So every several months, my mother would pack me up and take us to the city. The city is San Francisco. It was a gritty city shrouded in fog. We drove through, with my nose was pressed to the glass, and we drove through North Beach, the Tenderloin, the heavily billboarded Van Ness Avenue, to this house where we were told stories of the 1906 earthquake, because they were all in that house when it happened. And we also met my great uncles who looked ominous because I heard they ran guns to the Irish. They didn't run them. They put them in boxes and sent them to the Irish rebels in Ireland to get rid of the British. But the cities were great. They were filled, for my youth, they were filled with rebels and gangsters and action in some way or another. I chose an entirely different city, though, when I chose LA, and my family wasn't involved with this choice. You go into LA, the club scene boomed, the Sunset Boulevard it roared, concrete buildings towered, the Biltmore Hotel goes around at the top downtown. So I would come over the hill from San Luis Obispo and then take the exit on Mulholland Drive and drive down, and you could feel the pulsing city and the electric light glow, and everything started to be energized inside me, and I would not need a cup of coffee for the next several hours. So everything we learned about cities this semester is captured by both of these cities in many ways. And what's fascinating, and when I came to USD, no, I'm not going to give you that secret yet. I did a lot of reading about urban landscapes. San Francisco is known to be mysterious. It's been called the city, Baghdad by the Bay, Left Coast City. These are its nicknames. It is described in books as a place of outcasts and rebellions, so that works for me. This is a great book, Season of the Witch by David Talbot, where he expresses that this is what San Francisco is like as a city. But we've talked a lot this semester about Mike Davis, and when he describes LA, he describes it as a concrete city. A city, in his book, City of Courts, it has paved, everything's concrete, whether it's horizontal or whether it's vertical. It's called La La Land, Tinseltown, the City of Smoke, and it's an interesting place. San Francisco is like an old soul fog-draped, rebellious, and poetic, and in contrast, Los Angeles sprawls and gleams with ambition. So one looks inward, and the other one looks towards the spotlight. So regardless of the differences between San Francisco and LA, all of the panels, exhibits, the books, all the book groups, they've helped me to more deeply understand the lure of the city and what the city does to make me feel human presence. So how did I end up in this city? And given this winding road through a small town and through the contours of two world cities, ironically, it was a job ad that's not ironic. It's the type of job ad that lured me here. It was a job ad to teach urban politics. There's nobody here from poli-sci who will say, yeah, how often did you teach urban politics? But I was lured. So here I am. I have a degree. Brian said Congress, legislation, gender, Congress, national level. But I was hired because I took a couple of classes at UCLA to teach urban politics, and I also work for the city of San Luis Obispo. So upon arrival, I order a stack of books on urban politics. I start reading and preparing, and my courses were filled with fascinating discussions. I'm not going to go into this, but I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about everything that we talked about this semester, about the fact that the rural. This explains how I got here, too, that people are no longer living in the rural areas. The increase in suburban is really high, and urban has stayed about the same. But we're starting to live in, this is what I used to teach in my classes, in metropolitan areas. And a metropolitan area is beyond the city walls. It takes in the larger region. And so here we are. I don't know, I got that out of order. But here we are in San Diego. We're not big, but we're on the list of the top metropolitan areas by population. And then we got to talk about forms of government. So it was very exciting to be here and teaching urban politics. It became my favorite class because we covered topics like democracy, the party boss machine, the struggle for political control, the great immigration from the farm to the city, governmental fragmentation, issues like racism and redlining in the city, issues like the unhoused. So if you're interested in the concepts of democracy, there's no better place to start than the city. Cities are where democracy comes to life in its most immediate and tangible forms, where people organize, protest, vote, and shape the spaces that they live in. So teaching about urban politics meant for me exploring what power is and how it's distributed and who gets public goods, how they're negotiated, and how diverse voices are then heard in those close quarters. Cities really reveal democracy in action, conflict, and compromise. So this is what I loved, and it's how I thrived, and it's why I am now here in my city of San Diego. This process here, whether on purpose or intuitively, Dr. Clack has forced me and many of you to think deliberately about all sorts of landscapes, and he has done so using the pedagogy that we adore in a liberal arts education. This process helped me to see my draw to San Diego. It showed me that I love the natural world, but I feel comfort in the cities like San Luis Obispo. Teaching urban politics, though, reminded me of all what cities meant to me in my life. And now I also realize I ended up in San Diego instead of one of those other metropolitan areas because San Diego was a compromise. We have all these landscapes here, and we have all the vibrancy of what MJ and Amanda described as well. This city is something very special, and I'm happy to have been part of this. And once again, the Humanities Center has given us the gift of participating in a conversation, a big conversation that helps us to participate in what humans do best, thinking. And it makes me feel a lot of hope and faith in the liberal arts education, and I can't wait for the next series.